Hello, and welcome back to Take Back Your Authority with Heather Boltice. Welcome back. I'm excited to have you here today. So, what we're going to talk about today is actually the book of Esther. I'm really excited to talk about that with you. I'm going to go ahead and do two parts because it would just be way too long for one. So, you'll have to wait for the second part to see how the story ends. But what I love to do always is to start with the full armor of God. So, let's go ahead and do that because we want to put our armor on every single day. And this is from Ephesians 6:10 through 18. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything to stand firm, then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, which can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, and pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Yes. So it is very important to keep the armor of God on, especially we are definitely in the days of evil and we need all the protection we can. And using the word of God, which is the sword, is very important to know the word of God and to speak that against the evil ones. I'm just going to get Esther up here so that I can start reading that. And yeah, and let me pray us in. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this time that we get to spend together and for the reading of your word and getting to understand your word and how you speak to us through your word, Lord. And we just praise you and thank you and speak in me and through me, Lord. Give me your words to speak. Amen. All right, here we go. Okay, I love the book of Esther. I love how God uses women to do so many things in his word. And even still today, he uses women all the time. And I'm so grateful for that. Because obviously I'm a woman and he can use me. And I love how he always uses the least of these, right? People that you would never expect that God would use. And he uses them. I have to turn my fan on. It's a little warm here. It is so great. I love that. All right. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. So, a little bit of a background with Esther. So, they don't know who the author of the book is. They believe that it was a Jew who lived in the Persian city. It was written about 460 BC. And in Persia, in this Persian city, they celebrated Purim every single year, which was a festival for the Persians. And Esther was ended up becoming a Jewish queen in Persia. And then Israel, and it's kind of a little bit of a backstory. So when the Israelites were leaving Egypt after they were freed and they crossed the desert and they were going towards the promised land, the Amalekites attacked them. And so since then, there has been a conflict between the Israelites and the Amalekites since then. So that will play into the story of Esther. And that's good to know that you would know that there was a tension between them. Okay. And then in this story, we'll talk about how Haman, I think there's an ice cream truck outside. Hopefully you can't hear that. Haman wants to destroy them. And basically, it's a threat to Israel continuing God's purpose through them and their future existence. Something that is also interesting in Esther is that there's 10 banquets. These people like to have banquets and eat and drink and have fun together. Yeah, I love that. Let's see. And there's a theme. So there's a theme of two in this book. And two means union, so coming together. Division, it can also mean division, which is good versus evil. And also two can mean a witness, somebody that brings the truth. And those three themes are definitely within this book. And this is also the only book that doesn't specifically reference God, worship, prayer, or sacrifice. But it is clear who Esther and the Jews are worshiping. God's sovereign rule is assumed I'm sorry, assumed at every point in the story. All right. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll start reading and I will stop throughout to kind of explain and go through this. So this is what happened during the time of Xerxes, the king Xerxes, who ruled over 127 provinces, stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. And a citadel is a big city it's surrounded by a wall, so it's very protected. It's a big, huge area. And let's see. Okay, verse 3. And in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet. That's the first banquet of all his nobles and officials, the military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor of the glory of his majesty. So that's 4 months? No, it's 4 months? 4, 8, 12, 30, 40. 5 months. 5 months of partying. Okay, so when these days were over, the king gave another banquet lasting 7 days. Let's see here. Apologize. So this is the second banquet. When these days were over, the kings gave a banquet lasting 7 days. So that was much shorter. In the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people, from the least to the greatest, who were in the citadel of Susa. So for everybody. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen fastened with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on the marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of I'm not sure what that is, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. So they were very, very wealthy if they have couches of gold and silver. Probably not very comfortable, but they probably put the cushions on top of it. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Let's see. Wine was served in the goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. So he loved to drink. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions. It's like an open bar from the king with the best wine and drinks that you'd ever want. For the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he had wished. Okay, so at this time, King Xerxes was married to Queen Vashti. So here comes in the queen. Okay. Queen Vashti also, I'm sorry, 180 days is 6 months. I apologize. So 6 months of partying. Can you imagine that? I think after a while you just get tired of that. You want to go do something else. Anyway, okay, continuing on to verse 10. On the seventh day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits, basically he was drunk from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him. So a eunuch back in the day they would actually castrate these men because they wanted to make sure that they would not go after their wives. So these are the men that would serve the women, and they were unfortunately castrated so that they would not sleep with the women, in case you didn't know what that was. Okay. His servants who served him, there's 7 names. And then to bring before him Queen Vashti. So he said, go get the queen, wearing her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people of the nobles. So basically, he just wanted to show her off, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. I don't know what was going on. I don't know if God was like, you know what? I'm going to tell her not to go. But she could have been killed for not going to see the king. So that was very bold of her. I do believe that she had a lot of power because after Queen Esther becomes queen and the whole thing goes down, she ends up going with her son, who ends up being the next king and kind of commanding him. So I think she did have a lot of power. So maybe that's why she was just like, I'm standing up for myself. I'm not going to be paraded in front of these men for you to show me off. We don't know. Well, but it's kind of interesting because she literally could have had her head chopped off. Okay, continue on. Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in the matter of law and justice, so you see that the king didn't even know all the laws. He just had people that would tell him what the laws were, and he would consult them. He spoke with the wise men who understood the times and were closest to the king. Sheena, Shether, Admatha, Tarshish, Marish, Marcina, and Memucan, the 7 nobles of the Persia and Media who had special access to the king and were highest in command. So, according to the law, he's asking these guys, according to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti? He asked. She has not obeyed the command of the king Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her. So he's a little mad, obviously. Then Memucan replied in the presence of the king and the nobles, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and all the people of the province of King Xerxes. So they're like toting his ego and saying, oh my gosh, can you imagine what she did? That was horrible. It says, "For the queen's conduct will become known to all women." So these men were afraid that the woman would get heir to the fact that the queen said, "No, I'm not gonna do what you told me to do." And these women are just gonna start to rebel. So basically, that's what these men were afraid of. They will be known to all women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, "King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come." This very day, the Persian and Median women of nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. So they're just worried about themselves at this moment. So they're just like, we got to get this nipped in the bud. Okay, verse 19. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. So they're like, you got to get rid of this girl because she is trouble. She's going to continue to not listen to you, and she's going to make these women think that they can stand up for themselves. So you need to get rid of her. Okay. Then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all the vast realm, all the women will oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. Let me go back. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone else who's better than she. Okay, yeah, so they want to get rid of her. Verse 20. Then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout all this vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands from the least to the greatest. So basically, they just are wanting to save, they just want to save themselves. They want to be in the positions of higher position, and they don't want their women telling them what to do. Okay, verse 21. The king and his nobles were pleased with this advice. Of course they were. It went it made it better for them. So the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and to each people in their own language, because there were several different languages, and this goes back to the Tower of Babel, where everyone was one language, and God took down the Tower of Babel and scattered the people, and this is why everybody had different languages, even though they lived in near areas to one another. Okay, so he sent and remember, he had, I think it was 127 provinces, so that's a lot of different people that all these decrees were sent out to. So let's see. Okay. Yeah, so then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout, okay, I read that. 21, the king and his nobles were pleased with, oh, I read that. Excuse me, I'm sorry. 22, he sent his dispatches to all parts of his kingdom to teach each province in its own script and to each people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be ruler over his household using his native tongue. All right, let me see if there was anything else that I was going to say. No. Yeah, okay. So let's move on to chapter 2. So Esther was made queen. So later, when Xerxes, later is 7 years later. Sorry, I got my little notes down here too. So yeah, so later when King Xerxes' fury had subsided, it actually had been 7 years since he banished the queen. I don't know if I think that she was probably still considered queen, but she didn't do anything because of what it says here next in the scripture that to replace her. But I'm sure she had no say in anything. She probably just still lived at the palace and that was it. Okay. So later, 7 years later, when King Xerxes' fury had subsided, he remembered Vashti. He remembered his wife. I'm thinking, what does this guy have to think about that? 7 years later, oh, yeah, I remember I was married to this lady, this queen. I just think that's funny. Okay. And what she had done and what he had decreed about her. Then the king's personal attendants proposed, let search be made for a beautiful young virgins for the king, Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful young women into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king to be queen instead of Vashti. So that's why I believe that Vashti was still queen at that time. And then they replaced her with obviously Esther to become queen. That's why I believe that she was still queen at that moment. Okay, let's see. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This advice appealed to the king and he followed it. Of course, he gets all these beautiful women from all over the place and he has a huge harem. He gets to pick from any of them who's going to be queen. Yes, of course he was pleased with that. Okay, verse 5. Now, there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew to the tribe of Benjamin. So this goes back to King Saul, who was also from the tribe of Benjamin. So this Jew would have been a descendant of Saul of the Benjamin tribe. Okay, and his name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shemaiah, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jehoiakim, king of Judah. So that captivity was actually several years before that. Specifically, Mordecai wouldn't have been taken into exile, but his ancestors were. So that's why it talks about the different people in the line. Okay. So Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her in as his own daughter when her father and mother had died. So that was very much a tradition in the Jewish culture, is that when family members died, whoever was their next of kin would take care of the person, and especially in particularly women. So God put that rule in there to protect women because he knew in the time that widows, orphans, because of the times, they weren't able to support themselves. So God put that in as a rule, as a provision to make sure that women would be safe. And so one thing too is that the Jews would go by two different names. So they would go by a Gentile name, or they had a Gentile name and also a Hebrew name. So depending on what situation they were in, they would use either name. Yes. Okay. So when the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many young women were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Hegai. Esther was also taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Hegai, who had charge of the harem. She pleased him and won his favor. Immediately he approved her with her beauty. Oh, okay, I'm sorry, excuse me. Verse 9. She pleased him and won his favor. Immediately he approved her with her beauty treatments and special food. So these women that were in the harem, they would get all these different beauty treatments. They would have the most amazing food. So they were treated very well, which was great. Okay. He assigned to her 7 female attendants. So she had 7 female attendants. I would love that today. I could use one attendant right now just to clean my house. That would be awesome. Okay. Okay, let's see. 7 female attendants selected from the king's palace and moved her and her attendants into the best place in the harem. So she was already at the top. So people already admired her beauty and she was already placed to the top. Okay, let me go on. Verse 10. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. She would have used her Gentile name. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. The king had called all these people in. Even the women that didn't want to get called in got called in because if you're part of the harem, you're going to be called by the king. We don't know at this point if Esther wanted to go or if she was just forced to go, but obviously God had a plan. So God had a plan for her, whether she wanted to go or not. God found favor on her, just God found favor with Joseph when he was sold into slavery into Egypt. And so we just see the story how God is good and he will place us in situations that maybe we don't think are the best at the time, But if we continue to lean on God and listen to Him, He will tell us, He will guide and direct us to the place that we should be. Yeah, we just got to continue to trust in the Lord. Okay. So, verse 12, before a young woman's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and six with perfumes and cosmetics. So, I'm guessing that they're being taught how to make those things, especially back in the day. You couldn't just go to the cosmetic counter and say, hey, give me some Chanel number 5. So they're probably taught how to do all these things, how to wear their makeup, how to wear their hair, how to do all these things so that they were presentable in front of the king. Okay. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. So I'm not sure. I think the different ladies would bring different gifts to the kings, hoping that they would be chosen as queen. So I'm not sure what they would take to the king, but they were allowed to take anything. Verse 14, in the evening she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem to the care of Shezgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. Okay, so verse 14, this is basically explains she would go be with the king in the evening. Whoever he called, they would go and they would be with him. And then in the morning, they would come back to the harem and go where the servant told them to go, where the eunuch told them to go. Okay, who was in charge of the concubines? She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. So it doesn't say how many people, how many women they gathered for him to pick from, but this was it was like a year, obviously a year long or more time frame for him to go through all the women, decide who he wanted, and then choose who he wanted to be queen. But we're not told how many women he had available to him. Okay. Verse 15. When the turn came for Esther, the young woman Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of his uncle Abihail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the harem, suggested. So this shows that Esther was wise. She wanted to do the right thing. And so she asked the eunuch, hey, what do you think is the best thing for me to bring to the king? She didn't just decide on her own. It is good to take advice from people that can give you good advice. Okay, let's see. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Nothing that would, okay. So here we go. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, sorry, in the 7th year of his reign. So I believe that let's see what it says. I have written down here. Okay, yeah. So this was actually 5 years later because of the Greek wars were going on. And so it was 5 years after. Yeah. So this was 5 years later that they had called the people. And then, oh, excuse me. Okay. Yeah. So it was sometimes later. Okay. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any other woman, and she won his favor and approval more than any other virgin. So I do believe that God probably spoke to the king because obviously God had a plan what was going to happen and he knew the future. I think that he did make Esther, I mean, obviously she was already beautiful and intelligent, but I think he caused maybe a stir in his heart for Queen Esther so that the things later would play out the way that they do. Okay, so he was attracted to Esther more than any other woman, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet. Here's another banquet. Esther's banquet for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with royal liberality. So the different gifts could have been debt payoff, a bunch of different things to really please the people, for the people to see him favorably. But can you imagine being Esther? You're a Jew and you're in you become queen of the Persian Empire. I mean, that is crazy. I can just imagine what she is singing. Oh my Lord, just please help me in this, right? Help me to do the right thing. Help me to say the right thing and for the king to find favor in me. Obviously he did, but with everything going on, I mean, could you imagine you're a foreigner and then you become queen? And I love that God always uses the people that you would never expect he to do great things. So I just love that. Okay. So let's see, verse 19. When the virgins were assembled a second time, so after Esther became queen, then they're like, let's assemble some more virgins for the king to go take a look at. Okay, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. So the king's gate back then is where they had commerce, they had government, people of high ranking would sit at the gate. And yeah, so there was a lot going on there, and it was usually high ranking people. Okay. But Esther had kept, so Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, but Esther had kept secret her family background. Remember, she hasn't told anybody this, and nationality, that she was a Jew, just as Mordecai had told her to do, because the king might have just pushed her out, or who knows what he would have done if he found out that she wasn't Persian. Okay, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. During the time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Big Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. Okay, so Mordecai is at the gate because he's actually kind of a higher up official there. And then the king's officers were there. They got irritated for some whatever reason, and they wanted to go kill the king. I don't know what they were angry about, but anyway, so verse 22, but Mordecai, remember this is Esther's technically cousin, but he took her in, found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. So even that, there must have been like messengers that came back and forth. He was probably able to send messages to her. And then the fact that the queen was able to tell the king, I don't know if she just sent him a message or how that all played out, but that was really good of her to tell the king and to give the credit to Mordecai. Okay. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were impaled on poles. Yeah, back then they would have these big poles and they would just impale people with them to what's the word? I can't put to death. Sorry, I can't think of the word. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were impaled on the poles. All this was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. So that's important because this will come to play later in the story, that this information about Mordecai was put down in they call it the annals, but it's basically the books of the king. So they recorded everything that happened. So this will come into play later. Okay, let's see. Oh, okay. Esther 3. Okay, verse 1, Haman's plot to destroy the Jews. Okay, so Haman, okay, well, we'll get into this. So after these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hamadith. I can't say it. Hamadatha, the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than all of the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid. Okay, let me go back. Let me stop at verse 1. So he gave him an honor higher than any other nobles. We don't understand why. And that is in complete contrast to Mordecai, because Mordecai had not gotten anything for saving the king's life, which is not typical. Usually they would do something for these people that have saved the king. And yeah, so Mordecai had not been rewarded. And there's no reason that that Haman would have been honored, but we don't know. So Haman was actually a descendant of Agag, king of Amalek. So he was a descendant of them. So Haman is an Amalekite. So he is an Amalekite. And remember, the Israel and the Amalekites had a feud going on for at least like 500 years at this point. That will come into play as well. Okay. Verse 2, all the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. And the reason is because he was an Amalekite, and there was that tension between the Israelites and the Amalekites. So that's why he would not bow down, because there's references of Jews bowing down to other kings in honor of them. So it's not just that he wouldn't honor him for religious reasons, but it was the background of him. So There was that feud between them. Okay. Verse 3, then the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, why do you disobey the king's command? Why do you disobey the king's command? Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore, they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated. For Mordecai had told these officials that he was a Jew. And I don't know why he told them that, but he did for whatever reason. But God used that in this story. So that's important because if he wouldn't have ever told him that, then Haman wouldn't do what he's about to do. Okay. Verse 5. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Haman was a piece of work. Yeah. Yeah. He demanded, that's the ego demanding respect. Okay. Yet, having learned who Mordecai's people were, the Jews, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. Obviously, this goes back to the feud between them, because at one point, after the Amalekites had attacked Israel, at a time after that, was Saul actually attacked the Amalekites, and he just destroyed them and plundered them. And so this is why Haman would want to get back to the Jews and kind of reclaim their victory. Okay, verse 7. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, the pur, that is the lot, was cast in the presence of Haman to select a day and month. And the lot fell on the 12th month of the month of Adar. So this is like almost 11 months later that this fell on for the Purim to take place. They would cast lot, they would throw dice and decide things with the dice. Okay, verse 8. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, there was a certain, okay, so here's where he's very sneaky like the devil, that he gives like part truth but part lie to serve his own ways. So here it goes. There is a certain people dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. True. Their customs are different from those of all of, excuse me, their customs are different from those of all the other people, and true, and they do not obey the king's laws. False. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, so he's kind of kissing up to the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury. So basically, he's saying that when they kill and plunder these people, they'll be able to come back and give you 10,000 talents of silver, which is like 375 tons of silver. So that's a lot of silver. Okay, so the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king says, keep the money. Keep the money, the king said to Haman, and do with the people as you please. So at this point, Haman's, yes, I've got the signet ring. I can write whatever I want. I'm acting as king right now. He just thinks that he's done this thing. But God always has a different plan. Okay, verse 12. Then on the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned. And that was in, I have that date. So that would have been April 17th, 474 BC. Okay, yeah, so that was the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned because the Jewish calendar or the Hebrew calendar is different than what we have currently today. Okay, so they wrote out in the script of each province and in the language of each people all Haman's orders to the king satraps, the governors of the various provinces, and the nobles of the various people. So he wrote all these things, they sealed it with the king's seal, and then they sent it off to all the governors and the people in high places to tell what the decree was. Okay, sorry. These were written in the name of the King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring. So even though King Xerxes didn't exactly write it, Haman did, but he was given permission by the king. So then they say that it was from the king. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order, hear this, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. Could you imagine getting that as a Jew? That's crazy. So that day, the the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, is actually March 7th, 473 BC. So it's actually almost a year. It's almost a year later that this decree was to take place. But could you imagine here? I mean, I'm Satan doesn't Satan never Satan's not a creator, so we only have to copy, but you think about all the times that the Jews have been attacked. You think about World War II and how the Jews were singled out and they were attacked, and Satan doesn't come up with anything new. It's always the same thing. That's what he used back here. Let's gather them and kill them. But I can imagine as a Jew hearing this information, I mean, I would just be like devastated. What in the world? So, anyway, okay, so a copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality so they would be ready for that day. The couriers went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. So, this was another banquet. So the king and the Haman, they're just like, well, let's go party because look, this is what I always wanted, and we're going to destroy the Jews and let's go party, basically. Let's see what happened next. Okay, so Esther 4, Mordecai persuades Esther to help. So Mordecai, again, is Esther's cousin. Okay, chapter 4. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city wailing loudly and bitterly. He wanted to let Esther know that something bad was happening. But he went only as far as the king's gate because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter into it. So the king's gate was really like a very wide area. So like when they would make these walls, I mean, these walls, like the walls of Jericho, were so wide that there were like houses within the walls. So this was a pretty big area, but he had to stay right outside that area. Excuse me. Okay. Not allowed to enter the king's gate. In every province to which I'm sorry, I'm thinking about the wall to the city. This is the king's gate, so excuse me, that was not right. But he couldn't go into the king's gate. Okay. In every province to which the edict and the order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews. I couldn't imagine. With fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Yeah, I'm sure they're just like, okay, God, what is going on? How are you going to help us? Okay, verse 4. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So she had not heard what was happening. She didn't hear about the edict. So she's in the walls and didn't know what was going on in the king's palace. Okay. Verse 6. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. And isn't it interesting that Haman said, I'm going to give you all this silver? And then Judas gave the government silver for to capture Jesus. There's no coincidence there. Okay, verse 8. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict of their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. So Mordecai's telling her, this is what's happening. You need to go and speak to the king about this. You need to save us. So Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal province know that for any man or woman who approach the king in their inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they may be put to death, unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. So she's basically saying, hey, dude, I know you want me to go to the king, but I could go to him and he could be like, you're dead. and he hasn't seen me in a while, so maybe he doesn't want to see me. So obviously she's afraid. I mean, I would be afraid. Let's see what happens. Verse 12. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. So basically, he's saying you're not safe. Even if you're in the king's palace, he's going to find out you're a Jew and he could kill you. And there goes your whole lineage of your family. And God will find someone else to do it. And isn't that true in our own lives? It's if God calls you to do something and you just don't do it, God will call somebody else. God will call somebody else and he will still accomplish what he needs to get accomplished. I highly encourage you when you hear God speaking to you and telling you to go do something, even if it seems crazy, go to the king and I just do it. Trust God and do it. And obviously verify that is exactly what he said to do. But, God will accomplish his task regardless of whether you choose to follow him or not. Okay, so verse 15. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, 3 days, night or day, and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish. Wow, could you imagine her? Obviously, maybe God was giving her just like confirming to her that this is what needs to be done. But she was willing to go and die for her people and for God, which is incredible. And even too, it's such a contrast because they were always given the choicest foods, the best things to eat and drink, and her and her people, the people that served her were going to fast for 3 days and 3 nights, no eating or drinking. So she realized how important this was. So verse 17, so Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. So all of the Jews in the area fasted for 3 days and 3 nights. Okay, we're almost to the end of this part. Okay, so Esther's request to the king, chapter 5. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace. And I'm wondering here, so she fasted for 3 days. So did she go to before she ate anything? Or did she take a quick snack and then go to the king? Who knows? But okay, she put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. I'm I can just imagine she must have just been like, "Oh my gosh, okay, God, you have to work something out here because I'm putting it all out there." Okay, so she stood in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. I'm sure God prompted him to be sitting in that on its throne, right? I don't know how often they sit on their throne. Oh, I'm just gonna go sit on my throne all day and look down the hallway. I don't know how often they did that, but I do believe that was God ordained that he was sitting there so that he could see her. Okay, when he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her. Yeah, God made him pleased with her. And he held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Okay, so something here that is important is it's in, oh my goodness, now I can't find the verse. Philippians, I believe. Give me a second while I look for this. Oh, here we go. Okay, Proverbs 21, verse 1. So this is where I'm believing that God did summon him to go sit on his throne, because in Proverbs 21 verse 1 it says, "The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. He directs it like a watercourse wherever he pleases." So I do believe that God had touched his heart to go sit on the throne that day for Queen Esther. Okay. So let's see. And he had a sweet spot for Esther, I think. Okay, verse 3. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half of the kingdom it will be given you." Wow, that's a lot. Okay. And then she replies, "If it pleases the king, replied Esther, let the king together with Haman, she's very smart, come today to a banquet I prepared for him. So she had already prepared the banquet. So she was already assuming that the king was gonna say yes and accept her invitation, because she had already prepared the banquet. If she hadn't if she had not been assuming that was gonna be happening, she wouldn't have prepared the banquet. Say that 5 times fast. So that is her faith. She had faith that God would rescue her, and so she went ahead and prepared that banquet before she even went and asked the king for what she was gonna ask him. Okay, if it pleases the king, replied Esther, let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for him. Bring Haman. Oh, and then bring Haman at once, the king said, so that we may do what Esther asked. So he's okay, let's go. I'm all excited. Let's go to this banquet that you have prepared for me. I mean, I'm sure not any other of his women had ever come up and said that. Maybe he was excited. Oh my gosh, this lady's prepared a meal for me. Okay. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king asked Esther again, now what is your petition? It will be given you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted. I'm sure Haman, when he heard that, was like, what? You're going to give her half your kingdom? 'Cause, yeah, Haman's all about himself. Okay. Verse 7, Esther replied, my petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet. I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question. I'm not sure why she had them have a second banquet. Maybe she was, like, trying to feel them out, see what they were like, or maybe she was nervous and she's, "Okay, I gotta just extend this again because I'm not prepared to ask this." I think she did wanna butter him up and to make sure that he was in a good mood, and also too, I think she wanted to make sure that when she did say the things that she's going to say, that everything was in the right order and so forth. Okay. Part 2, I will record part 2 and we will finish the book of Esther and you will see what happens. But this, like I said, this is one of my favorite books. I love how God uses women. He always uses the least likely people to do the greatest things. And I just love that. And so just know that you don't have to be famous or a multimillionaire or whatever for God to use you. If you are willing, He will use you. So I pray that you will be open to God's calling and what He has for you. And of course, if you have not accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, it is very easy. You just repent. You say, God, forgive me my sins. I believe that you are the Son of God, that you rose again from the dead, and I surrender my whole life to you. It's as simple as that. And when you do that, the angels in heaven will be rejoicing, and I will be too. And excuse me, you can DM me on Instagram at heather.boltice and let me know that you have decided to give yourself give your life over to Christ, and I will definitely be praying for you. Until next time, subscribe and leave a comment and share with anybody that you think that this would be helpful for and or be a blessing to. And I look forward to our next podcast, the second part of Esther. All right, have a great day. God loves you. I love you, and have a blessed day.